Okay, so this is gender, which is chapter 9, and I believe we're on part 4 now, if not part 5. We're going to start with slide 15, which is about gender inequality. Now, you actually have probably heard a lot of these terms before because they have been in the news a lot fairly recently, especially with the Me Too movement. So we're going to start with the idea of sexism, that this is one that most of you guys are familiar with, and all it is the belief that one sex, and let's say usually male, is superior to the other. Now, it is a system that is not just on the individual level, it is a system that is on a societal level, so we can actually see this. There is a macro-micro link in terms of sexism. Right? Now, what happens is sexism is fueled by a system called patriarchy. Now, you've heard this one over and over this semester, and you specifically heard about it when I talked about Goffman's presentation of self and masculine and feminine behaviors. That most of those are informed by patriarchy, which is male-dominated society. Okay? So patriarchy then pretty much fueled by what is called misogyny. Misogyny, an ingrained prejudice against women. Essentially what it is this idea of dislike, contempt, or hatred of women. Okay? And I included another term that you may not have heard, but is becoming something that society really needs to focus on, and that is misogynoir, which is misogyny directed towards Black women. So when we're talking about the idea of intersectionality, what we see is when we look at the conflation, when we look at the intersection of race and class, that when we look at society, that Black women actually bear the brunt of both racism and sexism together. Okay, so slide 16 then, we talk about patriarchy. Like I said, we've talked about it several times, that this is actually produced by cultural hegemony, and it is something that is embedded in our social systems. So what happens is people ask me, where did patriarchy come from? We actually have little evidence that there have been large matriarchal societies. There have been small pre-industrial ones. However, predominantly across the world, we actually see that there is a system of male privilege or dominance. We already talked earlier this semester then of the effects that patriarchy has on countries like India and China, where male preference was so strongly emphasized that the result were so many daughters were actually either killed or abandoned. And now in both countries together, you're looking at 70 million men, more men than women, which is actually going to lead both of the countries into a demographic crisis in probably another generation or so. Okay. So what happens when you look at this idea of male privilege or patriarchy, what you argue is that men actually enjoy certain unearned advantages that are not available to women. People kind of bristle at this idea of privilege these days because basically you're saying that someone has something that they haven't earned. And when we say that, this unearned privilege that males have over women actually happens just because they're born guys. You don't get control whether you are born, male or female in a society. You get to control eventually your own gender identity. However, what we can argue is that for male individuals, it's not like they did anything in order to be male in presentation, right? And in this case, men actually enjoy a lot more unearned privileges than women. Now, the first bullet point in under male privilege in slide 16, you're probably looking at existence, right? Do women actually exist? Now that seems like a really abstract, weird question to ask, but the Bechdel test, right, which is a test that is used when examining media in a content analysis. Basically, you watch any TV show, you watch movies, etc., and you basically look at these two criteria that are really, really basic. So the Bechdel test consists of the following. The first is, well, when you watch the movie or TV show, are there two female characters who actually have names? Okay, so two female characters that actually have names, meaning they're significant enough to be listed as a character rather than, waitress one or, hooker two. And the second part is where a lot of movies do fail, is that these two women have to speak to each other about something besides a man. Okay, and interestingly enough, if you look at a lot of the blockbuster movies, the top grossing movies in America throughout history, even up until recently, most of them fail the Bechdel test. That I know that the Marvel movies have actually topped the box office for every year for the past I don't know how long. And in the case of Marvel, you only find that in that whole series of superhero movies that I think 2 or 3 actually passed the Bechdel test, one of them being Black Panther. I think that, I don't remember which one, Thor Ragnarok, I think completely failed. And the one before Endgame, what was that one called? That one actually passed, but on a technicality with one sentence at all. So, do women exist? Well, according to the media, they may exist, but they don't talk about anything except for men. And if they do talk to each other, it is rarely. Okay. The other one is representation, that in the United States, we are still questioning whether a woman can be president or a good leader. I am going to throw in there, if you look at this COVID crisis and you look at the countries that are doing the best, you are looking at female leadership, at female presidents, that the president of Taiwan, President Tsai Ing-wen, she actually is kind of being held up as the person who did a lot in terms of keeping her country protected and safe during this whole mess. Okay. So that feeds into the second one, which is this idea of authority. That there is this assumption then that women somehow do not have authority, cannot command a group, that they tend to be worse leaders, which is entirely inaccurate. We can actually go take a look at the news, go to Google, type in then women leaders and coronavirus, and you will see that female leadership is effective. And the last one that I wrote is safety. But we don't often think about this one when we think about women's existence. But more or less, we are kind of taught to always fear our surroundings, fear the public, fear the other people, the men that we know, fear parties, fear going to the bar, etc. That is, I think it is drummed into you in a very, very early age that if you are a woman, you are at risk. That is, I don't know how many times we've been kind of told, never set your drink down at a party or at a bar because someone may drug it and you may be sexually assaulted. There is this fear of walking outside by yourself, especially if it's in the dark. That my dad actually, when I turned 18 and went off to college, he presented me with pepper spray. He presented me, he basically told me to always have my keys in between my knuckles when I walked outside. He also had a little flashlight for me to carry around. This is before cell phones, really way before cell phones, and gave me a little flashlight to carry around so that I would never actually be in the dark. Okay. So patriarchal reasoning maintains that male superiority is a function of biology. That I often hear, well, it is because men are biologically superior, we have more upper body strength, we're faster, etc. Which is really good when you're running away from a lion or lifting wood. However, wait, I shouldn't have said lifting wood, firewood. Sorry, and I'm not editing that out because I don't know how to edit. Patriarchal reasoning says male superiority is a function of biology. When you think of society today, when you think of the kind of superior jobs that pay the most, when you think about industrialization and post-industrialization, physical strength is no longer a criteria in terms of arguing for superiority. Like I said, in the hunter-gatherer sense of the word, it might have been a little bit of a advantage. However, now it really does not actually equate to success in modern day society. So we come to slide 17, and I actually wore my necklace to approach it, and that is feminism. Now, I know that you guys have heard me say this word all throughout the semester, especially that dude who keeps coming into the Zoom chats to scream that feminism is bullshit over and over. I know that you've heard this word over this semester. And feminism is actually very basic. That is, you still see this negative association of feminism with these really undesirable qualities. That if I ask people, well then, what do you think of feminism? And the person is not a feminist, they'll say, well, I imagine angry women. I imagine lesbians. I imagine ugly women. That these are people who are strident, who have no humor, etc., etc. Now, the feminists always look at that and roll their eyes because when it comes down to it, feminism is very, very basic. The first is a belief. So this is, right, once again, this attitude of what you think, the belief in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. And then the second part of it is the social movements organized around the belief. Now, remember, you could say belief and action, and that is theory plus